Let's talk for a second about clean energy, Western New York, and some of the spending that's happening with our tax dollars here to support wind and solar energy, despite the fact that we have the Niagara Falls Power Generation Station, the oldest in the nation, the first power generation station of its kind, built directly by Nikola Tesla and then sabotaged by Thomas Edison's cronies, um, and then rebuilt. And so it's currently powering, I think it's 2.6 million megawatts of energy into the Western New York power grid. And yet, Governor Andrew Cuomo has chosen to spend our tax dollars on solar and wind energy throughout Western New York. It's happening in my town right now. And the specific company, I looked into their venture capital funding, and the venture capital comes from Chinese-backed investment companies. It's just unbelievable, people. The way all the network of webs tie together, and the way they're stealing our tax dollars and increasing our burden, from the state. The monkey on our backs is New York State and Cuomo's crony corruption. It's just so absolutely pathetic, his lack of ability to understand energy or really any social issue. This guy is an absolute moron when it comes to spending the people's money appropriately. So we've got the Niagara power generation stations creating 2.6 million megawatts of power for Western New York, largest in the Northeast. And yet he's choosing to spend billions and billions and billions on solar and wind, which have been proven detrimental to the environment. Let's take a wind for one moment here. Number one, it takes about 19 years for the payoff of the power generation from a wind turbine uh, for the expenditure and investment. The carbon cost is just astronomical due to the amount of concrete required for the bases of these. And the companies that are marketing this and being given our tax dollars are venture capital funded through Chinese investment firms. So the issue for me is that, number one, the wind towers have a life expectancy of about 18 years. Uh, when wind is responsible for providing your power to your grid, you actually can't rely only on the wind power. So what you have to do is have a secondary power generation station on standby and ready to feed into the grid should the wind fail to provide the power that you need. So you actually have to pay more per kilowatt hour because you're having the wind, you're buying the energy from them, and then you're paying a portion of your normal energy cost on top of that wind cost uh, in order to have your other power generation means on standby. Because every day they bid who's going to get the energy, who's going to sell the energy into the grid. And if wind wins it, then you have to actually pay more per kilowatt hour for your power to have the other plants on standby. And the other huge issue there is it takes 19 years to recoup the cost of installation of one of these wind towers, and the life expectancy is about 18 years. The amount of material it takes to build a wind turbine, uh, raw extraction, mining operations, is so huge that it is actually one of the worst environmental destroyers that we could be doing as a population. We can build hydroelectric stations that have life expectancies into decades and decades and decades if we do maintenance and design them well. Um, so how is it that we're spending billions and billions and billions of tax dollars from a population that's already overtaxed and burdened by jeopardy taxation to the point of where our dollar is only worth about 65% of what it should be in the market in New York State, um, after you take into account all the fees through the chain from the employer, the employee, the sales tax, the property tax, and all these different layers of taxation that are built in, regulatory requirements and things for businesses, um, and all these things that are not based on actual profitability or wealth creation. All these taxes are arbitrary. to whether or not you're improving your quality of life. There are revenue-based tax structure systems here in New York, which means that regardless of your ability to establish wealth creation in your life, your tax burden will be the same. You're going to be taxed. It's probably over 35% of our wealth is being usurped by the state government here in order to fund projects like this, which are creating profits for Chinese companies and foreign owned companies. When I was in New Hampshire, I saw the same thing. There was a company out of Portugal. So a Portuguese company comes to a small town of 3,000, demands that they're allowed to put wind towers in. And when the town people say, we don't want that, they threaten to sue. And the whole reason they were there in New Hampshire trying to put these wind towers in, number one, they know it undermines our energy system. They know it's an ignorant thing to do. They know it creates just absolute environmental devastation because of the amount of material you have to mine in order to get the material to build the wind turbines, and the amount of carbon that is required in order to produce a wind turbine and install it, including that concrete, including making the generators themselves, the blades, the transportation of all that stuff. The carbon footprint is astronomical, and nobody's really talking about that. You can do your own research to get the exact numbers. But so specifically in New Hampshire, this Portuguese company was going after a $50 million. New Hampshire's small, 1 million people, pretty small state, insignificant. But it established a $50 million green energy fund. So foreign companies come to New York to get the $50 million out of the state that are tax dollars, which our children will have to pay. The state didn't have the money. And so they created this with debt. They went into debt in order to create this fund and then allow foreign companies to come in who are backed by venture capital out of China and other nefarious nations that are not friendly to American interest or share any sort of ideological similarities with the American citizens, the regular American citizens. I'm not talking about our socialist leaders right now. They share a paradigm of tyranny with a lot of nations that are allowed to do this sort of thing, where they invest indirectly through venture capital company formations who are backed by other venture capitalists. So if you do your research, you'll figure out that there's a string of investors, and it boils back down to nefarious actors that would otherwise be excluded from being able to interact with the American tax dollars. So it's kind of unbelievable to me. Back to this investment. In Western New York, we've got Niagara Falls, and we create enough green energy to power our Western New York. Why would we spend billions in tax dollars that are debt dollars, which will cost our future generations and our own lives more in taxes? So when we have to pay the interest and the service fees for the debt, and on and on. When we don't need more energy, we've got enough energy from the Niagara Power Station. If there was going to be any sort of energy initiative, what I would do, what I would say the best thing to do is to create small-scale, decentralized nuclear processing plants at our nuclear waste facilities with thorium reactors. There is one issue. Now it's been figured out that thorium reactors can produce enrichable uranium. So you can get some U-238 out of these reactors. But a thorium reactor will create a chain reaction if you feed in the nuclear waste out of our nuclear power plants. And it prolongs the reaction to be able to boil your water to create the steam to spin the turbine that will spin the generator and create your power. And you can do these reactors on small scales, and they're sodium fluoride, liquid cooled operations with thorium. Thorium is the number one abundant radioactive element in our world, available almost everywhere on the planet, and able to be operated in a nuclear plant in such a way as to get rid of nuclear waste. So the end products out of that reaction, once it's done its chain reaction, it's over 100 times, it chains around, then it comes out, and what you get, instead of a U-238 that has a half-life of 300,000 years that we're currently sticking into 55-gallon barrel drums and burying and putting into old mines and encapsulating concrete. I heard a Democratic candidate say that the greatest thing in nuclear waste management that he has heard of, this was 3 years ago when I met a candidate for Congress in New York here, a Democrat, John, oh gosh, maybe Plum, Mr. Plum. So John Plum's idea that he heard and was just ecstatic over was to take expended frack mines where the fracking was all done, they got the gas they wanted, everything's done, and they were going to shoot the nuclear waste down into those mines and encapsulate it in concrete. I mean, are you kidding me? I wanted to snap the guy's neck right there, but I'm not a violent person. But I was thinking, you are so ignorant. You want to inject into our Earth's crust, where our groundwater is, that we will need for thousands and thousands and thousands of more years. We're going to be needing groundwater. You want to inject radioactive material, nuclear waste that has a half-life of 300,000 years. Are you fucking serious? No, it's absolutely ignorant. Absolutely ignorant. No, back to the thorium. Okay, so you get enrichable uranium that can be used in the existing power plants. You can enrich it, put it back into the existing power plants. Once that's spent, you put it back into your decentralized small-scale thorium reactor production facilities, which would create a resilient power grid for our nation. If you have, let's say you've got 25 power plants creating power for an area, it's pretty easy to design an attack if you're an enemy and take out those 25. Now, if there's 125 small scale, decentralized, they could mount an attack on that as well. But it's much more difficult to take out decentralized infrastructure than it is to just take out centralized infrastructure. Like our meat right now, the meat processing plants, 12 plants have closed. That's 30% of the meat production that this country does out of 12 plants. So that's less than 100 plants create 99% of our processed meats for us. That's very dangerous. That creates a very susceptible infrastructure. So back to the thorium one more time. The other product that comes out of it after your enrichable uranium is the spent fuel of thorium, which has a half-life of 300 years. You're talking 10 generations later, it's no longer nuclear, no longer radioactive, no longer a problem. It solves all of the storage issues for your long-term nuclear type waste. You can turn it into nuclear waste that only has a half-life of 300 years as opposed to 300,000. And they're just ignoring it. They'd rather pay for Chinese solar panels. That's where most of these solar panels are being produced and manufactured in China with the rare earth metals that are required to be able to do that sort of photovoltaic cell panels that they're making. Some other issues, wildlife, and then we're going to wrap this up. Wind turbines are responsible for killing many endangered type species and affecting bird migrations, bat migrations, all kinds of different things that are a critical part of the ecosystems in various areas that we rely on. We want these ecosystems to be strong and healthy for thousands of years into the future is how we should be thinking. Where Cuomo's thinking about his bank account and the people who are influencing him, their bank accounts in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. That's why all of these projects that he's made priorities and funded to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars are all flopping. None of them have been a success. He is a complete disgrace as a politician and incompetent to solve any of the issues for this state or to be able to even engage in a productive debate, a discourse with people when he was running for governor. If you go back and watch his debates, you'll see how bad this guy is. Just an absolute idiot.